Shalom from Jerusalem. This is TV7 Israel's daily news update. And in today's discussion, we will focus on the latest vis-a-vis the Islamic Republic of Iran. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Trump concluded their meeting, which lasted for about 2.5 hours, more than double than initially scheduled. And, of course, the details of this discussion have been in the cabinet room, remain in the cabinet room, not much leaked out of there for good reason, but we will try and dissect the various options on the table. The Wall Street Journal has confirmed that the Pentagon is preparing to deploy another aircraft carrier. There are technically two options available to the United States, obviously more than just two, but the USS Ford Strike Group currently deployed in Venezuela, roughly 8 days away from CENTCOM area of responsibility, but has been now 8 months at sea, so it's a question mark on whether or not they would want to deploy this aircraft carrier for another extended period of time. And the second option is a little bit farther away. The USS George W. Bush, currently at Norfolk off the coast of Virginia, just concluded a couple of drills and still needs to undergo a couple more before being able to get deployed, something that can be expedited, of course, and absent any port calls would roughly take 40 days or even less to arrive into the theater. And this obviously signals to the Islamic Republic of Washington's resolve. We will have to wait and see what that means for the Iranians and how they do interpret this from their perspective. Now, the Mossad, or rather the IDF spokesperson's unit in Farsi, has published a statement calling on Iranians only to utilize official links from the IDF and the Mossad intelligence agency in order to avoid falling into the trap of the Ayatollah regime that is seemingly doubling down on trying to hunt down any Iranian citizen who is fed up with the regime and may use all kind of tactics for that purpose. We will discuss that briefly as well. And naturally, also the front, the northern front for Israel, is a topic that we have been discussing for quite some time. And just over the course of the past 24 hours, U.S. Central Command has withdrawn from the Al-Tanf base, which is a strategic base in a very strategic location in Syria. The Syrian Defense Ministry has already taken over. What does that mean for Israel, for Jordan, for Iraq, and for the potential entrenchment of Iran in Syria? But before we discuss all that, let's now turn to introduce our experts for today, to include Brigadier General in Reserve, Dr. Amnon Sofrin, formerly the Chief of the Intelligence Directorate at Mossad, as well as a senior officer at the IDF Intelligence Directorate. Next to him, Brigadier General in Reserve, Yossi Cooperwasser, formerly the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs, the head of the IDF Intelligence Directorate's Research and Assessment Division, as well as currently the president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, among others. And last but not least, Brigadier General in Reserve, Relik Shafir, formerly an Israel Air Force commander, as well as a fighter pilot, among others. It's great to see all three of you. And I'd like to start with the discussion that took place in Washington. General Sofrin, we'll start with you. What should we analyze in this context? Not much came out, but nonetheless, we do have 2 cents about what was discussed.
I think that we should refer to what was published, because we don't know the right details that were discussed within the room, and as you said before, stayed within the cabinet room. That means that the President Trump just noted that he is going to go on with the negotiations with Iran to try to convince the Iranian regime to get to some agreement that will enable, first of all, to get rid of all the nuclear capabilities and the ballistic missiles as well. And on the Israeli side, it was published that the Prime Minister presented to President Trump what happens within Iran, what we know about the renewal of the arsenal of the ballistic missiles and their activity on what we call the nuclear facilities. And of course, Israel, as published, of course, presented to President Trump its red lines. That means, first of all, to get rid of the nuclear facilities. Second, the ballistic missiles to reduce the range so it won't endanger Israel. And the third one is to stop supporting all its proxies. And I don't believe that the Iranians are going to agree to all these three terms because for them it's what we call total surrender or complete surrender. And I don't believe that it's going to go in this direction. But still, negotiations are going on. Still, as I said before, going to launch another carrier, another group carrier into the Middle East and into CENTCOM area and to apply more pressure on the Iranian regime.
Thank you, General Sofrin, General Cooper-Wasser. As somebody who negotiated with the Americans on the Iran portfolio during the Obama administration as the Director General of the Israeli Ministry for Strategic Affairs and subsequently also in other capacities, today seems to be very different under the Trump administration. And Ambassador Mike Huckabee, before departing the State of Israel to the United States, has explicitly stressed that there is an extraordinary alignment, quote unquote, between the United States and Israel when it comes to the Islamic Republic. What are we to make out of that statement?
Yes, first of all, really the new team in Washington is much different than the previous one. And they understand what's at stake. They understand that they need to get from the Iranian assumptions that is much beyond what was achieved in the JCPOA by President Obama at the time and what the Biden administration was trying to accomplish. And that's why they've broadened the topics that are going to be discussed, not only the nuclear issue by itself, but also the ballistic missiles, the proxies, and maybe even trying to get from the Iranians some commitment not to hit the protesters in Tehran. The difference is really dramatic. And this is why, as General Sofrin said, there's a doubt that the Iranians are going to accept it. So in the end of the day, it doesn't matter if we agree that we should use more military power sooner than later. Basically, the two sides agree, Israel and the United States agree on the principle that this time what we have to extract from the Iranians is much more flexibility on the issues that worry us and that may serve as a threat to the security of Israel and the United States, by the way. It's not only the security of Israel. One thing that we have to remember is that the ballistic missiles issue is a threat by itself, even if they are equipped with conventional warheads. But of course, they're also a part of the nuclear project, because the nuclear capabilities of Iran are based on the capability to launch ballistic missiles equipped with nuclear warheads. So we have to insist on putting limitations on the kind of weapons they have. And this is an existential issue for the Iranians, but also an existential issue for us. If the Iranians are going to have the capability to launch ballistic missiles with nuclear warheads, this is a real threat, and we don't want to be exposed to that. So this is a critical issue. One other issue that is different this time than previously is that the way we came to this junction was through the issue of the survival of the regime. In previous times, we were talking about the question of whether Iran should have the capability to produce nuclear weapons or not, and how do we prevent it from having this capability. This time, the June attack is still very much affecting the capabilities of the Iranians. They have not recovered the capabilities yet. Maybe in the ballistic missiles, they did reproduce some of the assets, but on the nuclear issue, they did very little. But the understanding now is that something has to be done about the capability of the regime to stay in power. And the Iranians understand it this way. So regardless if the Americans are going to tell the Iranians, look, it's only about the nuclear weapons and the ballistic missiles weapons. We gave up on this idea of regime change. The Iranians are going to look at it as a regime change issue. And that's why we are all under the impression that if we end up with military operation, the reaction of the Iranians is going to be as if the regime is threatened, not only the nuclear weapons are threatened. And that's going to have a total different reaction on behalf of the Iranians, as they already threatened.
German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul also mentioned just yesterday in Berlin that from Germany's perspective, the threat of ballistic missiles is not just a threat to Israel, but also to Europe. The most advanced capabilities that the Islamic Republic has at its disposal, the so-called surface-to-surface capabilities, ballistic capabilities, have a range of more than 2,000 kilometers, which naturally also covers a large part of continental Europe. And looking at this, the German top diplomat emphasized Berlin is completely supportive of Washington's efforts to reach a negotiated solution with the Islamic Republic. And of course, prior to those remarks, we heard the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz, coming out and stating that within days or weeks, the Ayatollah regime's days are numbered. So it seems like Europe is really backing this push. It has also sent a couple of assets into the region in a supportive capacity. But if we focus for a moment on the aircraft carrier, General Shafir, you, roughly a week ago here on the show, and also subsequent to that, have provided quite the illustration of the capabilities of the USS Abraham Lincoln that has more than ample capabilities alongside all of the other deployed capabilities in the region to degrade the Ayatollah regime into the abyss. Why send another aircraft carrier? What is the message here? And wouldn't two aircraft carriers provide far beyond what the United States actually needs in order to bring about that necessary change?
Well, you could count the third carrier, namely Israel. Yes, the force that surrounds Iran is not just to enlarge the threat, but to be able to have continuous coverage of the area 24/7. And that would include electronic warfare systems that, in this case, are not a great necessity because the ground-to-air capabilities of Iran have degraded considerably, even though they're trying to revamp through Chinese systems. The Iranian Air Force is actually non-existent. So the EW will be there just in case, and then a wave of F-35s that can pick up signals such as ground-to-ground missile carriers, ballistic missile carriers, and then they can relay the data either to themselves or to F-18s. Each one of those carriers has 3 squadrons of F-18s, and carry these kind of surveillance and attack modes in real time, 24/7 requires quite a lot of air power. They're not stationed next to Iran, but have taken off a few hundred kilometers away, so that the Iranians can't really hit them. So that's as far as the carriers are concerned. And also we should mention the Tomahawks, some of them submerged, some of them off ships, that are part and parcel of the attack. and of course surveillance, not just aircraft, but satellites and other systems that can pinpoint and immediately direct targets to the flying aircraft in the air with precision munition. Today's precision munitions, we're talking about a 5 meter central, what we call CEP, which is hit area. So we don't need that much ordnance in order to hit a particular target. So I would say that uh, both Israel and the United States, of course, are ready for a strike in the very immediate future, and that is to point to the Iranians that they've reached a point, both diplomatically, militarily, and internally, that the stars have aligned in the sky against them. So they may do what they did in 1988 at the end of the Iran-Iraq war, where Khomeini has understood that they cannot go on, and he actually conceded that they've lost the war with the Iraqis.
And then he went on and he blocked the Strait of Hormuz and Operation Praying Mantis. Pretty much obliterated half of the Iranian Navy. So there are ongoing sequences since the Islamic Republic is not oblivious to the situation, is trying to drag its feet. What Professor Russell Berman just yesterday told us was for the purpose of trying to reach that election cycle into the midterm election that would then distract Washington from fulfilling its pledge to the Iranian people. But nonetheless, what I hear in Washington today and the last couple of days, it seems like it's not just a matter of if, it's a matter of when such an attack will happen against the Islamic Republic, something that does raise questions as to whether the Iranians are already convinced that that is the case, or are they willing to give it a go to try and drag their feet nonetheless in an attempt to somehow improve their situation in the event of such an attack. Obviously, as you once again illustrated, the power disparity here is immense. But nonetheless, it seems like Turkey's top diplomat, Hakan Fidan, is not completely in line with the rhetoric and various statements and analysis coming out of Washington these days. And he is coming out and stating that the United States may well agree that Iran will continue to enrich low levels of uranium. General Sofrin, that sounds to me like a capitulation, if it were indeed true, and just yet another JCPOA 2.0, which I highly doubt President Trump can afford.
I agree with what you said, Jonathan, because I think that Mr. Fidan maybe is trying to cheer up the Iranians and trying to negotiate or broker some deal between those two parts. And Mr. Erdogan announced that he is willing to be the go-between and to broker a meeting between those two sides in order to get to some agreement. But I don't believe that the Americans will agree to that, because this is going back to 2015, the JCPOA. And that means that the Iranians at that time were allowed to enrich uranium up to that level to 3.67%, which is what we call civilian enrichment. But you know that they took advantage on the fact that Americans went out of this agreement and began to enrich uranium up to the level of 60%. Now they have the capability, they have the knowledge, and they have the facilities, even though some of that were damaged, but nevertheless they can recover and get to install it in some hidden places that they will enable the Iranians to enrich uranium to a higher level. That means that if you allow them to go to 3.67, according to the NPT which they sign on, that means that you give them the ability to enrich uranium to a higher level, and they will take advantage of the situation. And as time goes by, they will go this way, and I don't believe that the Americans will agree to that.
True, but first of all, the NPT's remarks with regard to the enrichment is somewhat ambiguous, and it's not decisive about their right to enrich. Secondly, I think that the fact that a snapback was triggered, the Iranians are still under sanctions, and they don't have the right to enrich, irrespective of what type of deal will potentially be struck in their minds, since this would require the Europeans to erase all of those sanctions. And I highly doubt that at this point in time, Germany or France particularly would make such an overture to the Islamic Republic. Also for domestic considerations, which is something to take into account. Now, General Kupil-Vassar, I'd like to ask you specifically, if we may divert our attention for a moment to Syria. Al-Tanf was withdrawn from very quickly, came as a surprise to many people. Just 2 days ago, we had a hearing at the Foreign Relations Committee on Syria, where there was a discussion on that specific issue related to the strategic location of this territory, which is literally on the border between Jordan, Syria, and Iraq. And now the Syrian MOD sent their a couple of mechanized platoons in order to take over, and it seems like they also intend to deploy a division to the territory. What are we to make out of that, and how will that not challenge the capacity to basically thwart Iran's penetration of those areas, since Hashd Shabi is just across the border with a couple of other brigades that are very close to the Ayatollah regime and are very keen on revamping their efforts to entrench militarily in Syria?
Well, we have to remember, first of all, the idea of redeploying from Tanef was on the agenda for a long time, especially during the first Trump administration. They don't want to be there. And now that Daesh is, the ISIS is more or less dealt with in Syria, not entirely, but to some extent, and that their incentive to stay there has been reduced even further. And since they gave up on the support to the Kurds in the Rojava area in the north, they don't need the forces there as much as they did before. And secondly, there's been a major change in the sense that during the first Trump administration, it was the Syrian Assad regime that they had to deal with, and it was cooperating with the Iranians. Now the new forces of the Syrian army, new Syrian army, are not going to cooperate with the Iranians because they look at Iran as an enemy. So they are going to, maybe less effectively, but still try to prevent the entrance of weapons from Iraq to Hezbollah through Syria, or for any kind of use inside Syria itself. So bearing all of that in mind, it makes sense for them to move the forces from Syria and to take advantage of the fact that everybody is looking elsewhere, so that Israel is not going to complain, doesn't have time to complain now about it, and this is a fait accompli, and they are out of them. Also, it may go along with their intention to limit the threat to American forces deployed in the region, bearing in mind that the Iranians may try to hit these targets. So less targets, the lesser number of targets you have, it's the better. So all in all, they don't think that they paid a lot, and they have gained the fact that they can get out of Syria. They don't want to be in Syria. They didn't want to be in Syria for a long time, and this is an opportunity for them to do that, and they did it. And we have to realize that it's a new situation in Syria. The American administration trusts Shara. We don't. We are skeptical and suspicious about Shara. We know where he came from. The Americans have decided to trust him. And whether they're right or wrong, future will tell. But for the time being, this is their attitude, and they're happily allowing the Syrian forces to deploy in this place.
Well, General Kupelwasser, I'll let my Dutch aside dominate for a moment by inserting this truth with bluntness. The U.S. administration currently, when it comes to Syria, is dead wrong. It's not Daesh, but it is Ish, an Islamic State for all intents and purposes in Syria. We see now, since a year and a half ago, there were how many in the whole camp? 70,000? Came down to 27,000 just recently. And now U.S. Central Command is moving the worst of the Daesh terror operators, roughly 7,000 from Syria to Iraq, so they can control them, since under the new regime, they'll probably find themselves in some cave somewhere at some point. I don't know what type of thought is behind this. I know what the thought is, but I just disagree with it. It seems like what is going to come out of this is going to be horrendous. Closing sentence from you, General Shafir. I apologize. We only have 30 seconds left.
Yes, I think the stars have aligned. The political, military, diplomatic, and internal Iranian situation. And there will probably not be a better opportunity to change the whole game in Iran and remove their nuclear and ballistic capabilities, and maybe a little bit of a wishful thinking that this will take place within the next 4 weeks.
General Shafir, General Kupelwasser, and General Sofrin, thank you very much for all of your insights today. I'd like to thank all of you at home as well. Until our next edition, from here in Jerusalem, Shalom.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.